What is the saddest fact you know that most people will not know? Story 1. There's a recording of the last kawaii bird singing before it went extinct. It was a mating call sung by a male bird. The song has breaks for the female bird to respond. There's no response because the male kawaii is the last of its kind. Story 2. About a third of people with epilepsy don't respond to meds. There's this thing called SUDEP too, which is sudden unexplained death in epilepsy where a person goes to sleep and just dies. Story 3. There are over 55 million people worldwide living with dementia in 2020. This number will almost double every 20 years, reaching 78 million in 2030 and 139 million in 2050. Much of the increase will be in developing countries. Already 60% of people with dementia live in low and middle-income countries, but by 2050, this will rise to 71%. Edit. It also doesn't have an effective treatment. Story 4 ex-wedding photographer here. A lot of people are wildly disappointed with their wedding day. Like so much so, they lash out at wedding vendors. One of the main reasons people quit working in the wedding industry is due to ongoing abuse from their clients. You can do one tiny thing less than perfect, and they can turn on you. I've even seen 2 different photographers move cities entirely just to escape past clients. In the industry, we call it the wedding hangover, and it usually hits 2 weeks after. Story 5. As people age, they often experience loss of friends, family members, and social connections. In many cases, elderly individuals may find themselves living alone with limited mobility and facing health challenges that further isolate them from the outside world. Studies have shown that chronic loneliness among the elderly can have serious negative effects on physical and mental health, leading to depression, anxiety, and even increased mortality rates. Despite their wealth of life experience, wisdom, and often a desire for companionship, many older adults struggle with profound feelings of loneliness, which can go unnoticed by society at large. Story 6. I think someone said this in another thread the other day, but it sat with me. You don't recognize your lasts. The last time you ever hung out with your school friends, the last time you spoke to your grandfather, the last time you hugged your pet, etc. Point is, we never know when we are in a moment that this could be the last time you ever do this. Unless going through some kind of life change, you just don't realize this moment is special, and because of that, you most likely won't remember it. Story 7. If you watch footage of the 9/11's aftermath, you'll hear a ringing sound in the background. It's not actually ringing. It's a chirping device on first responders that were buried in the debris. Usually the device doesn't make a constant noise, but there were so many people buried that it created an unbroken wail coming from under the rubble. Also in the weeks and months following 9/11's, there were a lot of cars covered in dust on the streets surrounding what used to be the Twin Towers. These were victims of the attack who were never able to return. Story 8. Your loved one didn't say any last words. Edit. For context, I worked in a nursing home. People always ask, did they say anything? And the truth is, no. We obviously don't say that to the family, but death is not like in the movies. Also, a weird thing that happens sometimes is that 24H before death, they get a sudden spike of energy, which may look like they're getting better, so it confuses the family members sometimes. Also, 80% die alone. Working with old people broke me a little bit. Story 9. That on the MH17 flight that was detonated by a missile, only some of the people on board were deceased immediately on impact. Some of them would have survived for a few minutes, hopefully losing consciousness due to the air pressure, but we don't know for certain how long that would have taken. This weighs on my mind because I have no idea where my coworker friend was sitting in relation to where the missile hit. I just know it took days for her to be found. Story 10. It took my dog a couple years to realize he was here to stay. I was his 7th owner. I am his last. He was returned to the shelter multiple times for behavioral issues, and when he acted out, he would immediately get depressed, thinking he was going back. Very good dog, very happy now, and has turned into quite an entitled princess. Story 11. Autistic people live on average 54 years. 58 years if they don't have developmental delay, 39 years if they do, and 54 years on average. They are something like 9 times as likely to commit suicide as non-autistic people, but they also die from accidents, lack of access to care due to lack of connectedness or poverty, lack of someone to notice they aren't well, lack of people to help with anything at all, etc. Story 12. I choose to mention 2 things that are actionable. I don't know the exact stats, but the amount of perfectly good food being thrown away by every restaurant and coffee shop. It's literally trolleys, push carts, full per day. how much money people spend to cope with life. So how much time and effort is wasted on crap that takes up space and gathers dust? These are actionable in your own life as an individual. Try to eat healthy and not throw good food away. And stop for a moment and think longer term before buying something. Story 13. Enslavement ended gradually in the state of New York from 1799 to 1848. Freeing enslaved families one generation at a time over 3 generations. Parents were freed while their children remained enslaved for up to 28 years. I can't imagine being one of those parents. Story 14. About 100 billion humans have ever lived. Of those 100 billion, only about 100,000 people are considered significant enough to be remembered after death. For the vast majority of people, you will be completely forgotten within 50 till to 100 years. And with it all the joys and sorrows of your life, your thoughts and dream, your hopes and worries. All of it completely forgotten, as if it never existed in the first place. Story 15. When a man hangs himself, he will often get a death boner. When their loved ones find their body, this will be one of their last memories of their loved one, alongside desperate scratches on the neck and on nearby walls. Don't do it. Story 16. The Olympics is the excuse for massive amounts of government corruption. Ever notice how every Olympic stadium is built new rather than using existing structures? Ever notice how they always go over budget, often by double or sometimes even triple? Ever notice how they all seem to be famously low quality despite this? And yet, every year, who gets to build this crappy facility at enormous taxpayer expense is hotly contested. It's because an Olympic facility is the perfect opportunity for civil servants to do or repay favors for local businesses and their cronies. You want to get in good with the deputy mayor? His brother owns a paving company, and you're in charge of getting the Olympic Village paved. Why not give him a ring? We're going to need a lot of rebar. Why not ask the owner of that steel foundry you're trying to buy a Corvette from what he'd charge, and pointedly decline to see if that offer is market competitive? Story 17. That the chances of survival if you go into cardiac arrest outside of hospital is incredibly low. I think it's something like 20%, but maybe even lower. Even if someone is doing trained CPR, TV and movies have made us have this idea that you can just do a few chest compressions and the person wakes up. That very rarely happens. Usually you're just doing it long enough until a medical professional can come and take over. And then they still might not be able to do anything if they can't get a shockable rhythm going. Story 18. Scientists think that only something like 0.1% of all species that ever existed happen to be lucky enough to find themselves in the perfect conditions to fossilize for us to find. The vast majority of critters lived out their whole existence and either evolved to a new form or died out without leaving any trace for us to find whatsoever. Without a time machine, we can never know they existed. And if you could go back in time far enough, the majority of what we saw would be to some extent more or less a mystery. Edit to add. For instance, within our DNA, we have found evidence of a ghost population of a mystery species of our hominin cousins with whom we interbred. We have no other tangible fossil evidence. They weren't Neanderthals or Denisovans. We have no idea who these people were and wouldn't have any idea they existed alongside us if we relied on the fossil record alone. They were an entire species of people just gone without a physical trace. What other creatures might have been that we cannot begin to imagine? Story 19. That because the Yellowstone supervolcano is going to erupt in a geological eye blink, it doesn't actually matter that we're the instigators of the 6th great extinction. Hypothetical paleontologists millions of years from now won't be able to distinguish the damage we're doing from the damage the eruption will cause, which, incidentally, includes the complete destruction of everything on the North American continent. We're not going to have a legacy, not even a bad one. None of it means a thing. Story 20. Personal experience. Christian missionaries in West Africa. Covert Muslims. Those Muslims are often kicked out of their villages and forced to wander. Most of the time they have children. Oftentimes the children starve to death. I saw it happen with a Fulani family in northern Nigeria. It's the thing that made me leave religion altogether. Story 21. An in-depth knowledge how chickens, cows, and lambs are slaughtered in industrial agriculture. Think the movie Dominion adds straight stank. Hotter than hell in the kill floor in summertime and wet and cold in debone overwrap and other production areas for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Story 22. The American home has more clutter than anywhere on Earth. U.S. children, representing just 3% of the global population, account for 40% of the world's toy purchases. Some estimate the number of items in the average home to range between 60,000 and 300,000 distinct items. Home clutter and possession of excessive items contributes negatively to mental health. I spend most of my time at home and started looking into all this out of curiosity. Wound up severely emptying my home and only keeping items I actively use. It was a lot of crap to give away or toss. But it did indeed make a great impact mentally and practically. The ease of cleaning and organizing and the emptiness itself are pleasing. Plus, my remaining possessions have real value and stand out. Story 23. No matter how much of a good person you are, there will be people who will talk bad about you. So stop caring so much about what people think or say about you. Be happy and keep your loved ones happy. Do your work to the best of your ability and leave the rest to God. Story 24. More than 90% of SIDS deaths are shared in anti-vax groups as vaccine deaths. They will take the age of the child, and when their scheduled vaccination should have been, whether or not the child was vaccinated, and come up with a title like, "Baby dies 13 days after receiving RSV vaccine." I can't imagine the horror of losing my child, much less seeing the story being shared dishonestly to push anti-vax propaganda. Story 25. That my father is going to pass soon, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. The world won't come to a screeching halt. The world won't change, and from that point, I won't have my mother or father to talk to. That's the saddest fact I know that most people will not know, and that's just a part of life. Story 26. Actually, the meme which shows a Muslim ma'am screaming, photo is usually used to mock Muslims online, was actually him protesting against police brutality because police killed his sister in a kind of home raid. I don't have the photo right now, but the man who was protesting for justice became a meme among Islamophobes. Edit. Name is Shakil Ahmed Butt. Story 27. There's no diagnostic test for ALS. One day, you either lose your ability to speak or a hand stops working. You have to go through a battery of tests to rule out all other things that could be wrong with you. When those tests are negative, then you have ALS. Then your body slowly stops working over the course of the year. Your mind is still sharp as it ever was, but you cannot speak, eat, or swallow your own spit. You require constant supervision. Only when all your dignity is taken does ALS finally kill you. And we have absolutely no idea how to cure ALS. Sometimes it's genetic, but most of the time it hits randomly. Story 28. 90% of nursing homes are absolutely horrific. I'm an EMT and have been in and out of many of these facilities. Some few are high-quality, clean places with staff that really cares. The vast majority reek of human feces, have employees who don't care about the residents at all, and serve them barely edible mush for food. The worst one I ever saw neglected to put a patient on their prescribed oxygen. Nearly killed them. Actually might have. Never found out that turned out. But when I left them at the hospital, they were circling the drain. Story 29. Japanese occupation of Indonesia in WW2. I almost never see Indonesia mentioned, but they had the 5th highest death toll during the war. Approximately 4 million people were killed, 99% of them civilians. Millions more were tortured, raped, and enslaved. Allies largely avoided the islands in the Pacific Campaign, so it was mostly just sickening brutality for its own sake. Story 30. I saw a kid get killed in Iraq. Grown men too, but it's obviously different. But I've been close enough to see a few people die. Every cliche is true. Dudes always want to see /say/ remember / think about their mom, and kids too. Seeing a dying person in front of you ask for their mom is the saddest shit in world. Seeing a kid is the reason I basically can't do anything else but see him, and it's been almost 18 years, so I am pretty sure it's my penance or something. Story 31. Environmental data on climate change. I already forgot almost all of them, but while I was studying I saw a lot, and our teacher estimated a point of no return, where anything that is done will no longer have an effect. Everything will go wrong. Those responsible for everything will say that it is all your fault, as they have done for decades. Enjoy this present. Everything will go wrong, and it is very sad. Story 32. My dog didn't realize he was here to stay for a few years. His 7th owner was me. I am the last of him. He was sent back to the shelter on several occasions due to behavioral problems, and if he misbehaved, he would get upset right away, believing that he would be sent back. Excellent puppy, presently extremely content, and becoming quite the entitled princess. Story 33. That is, you die unexpectedly in the U.S., but have been under doctor's care. The police are called, but if you want an autopsy, the family have to pay. My friend's mother, who smoked and had COPD, was 54 when she died, still working so not too sick. She didn't wake up one morning. She wanted an autopsy but couldn't afford it. Her stepfather then told my friend she would have to be his little wife now. After years of inappropriate remarks, she kicked him out, but then she lost the lease on their apartment. Story 34. The disappearance of Geraldine Largay haunts me. She was hiking on the Appalachian Trail and became lost when she left the trail to relieve herself. While lost, she used her survival skills to survive for nearly a month, but eventually succumbed to starvation and exposure. When her body was found 2 years after her death, there was a note there reading, "When you find my body, please call my husband George and my daughter Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness for them to know that I am dead and where you found me, no matter how many years from now." During the time she was lost, she tried multiple times to call for help using her phone, but there was no signal. She saw multiple search planes and helicopters, but they could not see her through the thick trees. She tried to set fires to nearby trees to let them know she was there, but couldn't manage it. Towards the end of her life, she thought about trying to climb up onto a hill above the canopy, but by then, she was just too weak from starvation to do so. She died in her sleeping bag after 26 days of holding on for as long as she could, hoping help would come, but it never did. We know all of this because she wrote it down in a journal she had with her, and before she died, she wrote a note to her husband saying, "George, please read XOXO on it." Perhaps the most gut-wrenching fact of all is that Geraldine was found only about 2 miles off the trail, heartbreakingly close to salvation the entire time.